The courtroom was silent, not out of respect, but because a quiet fear had just walked in the shape of a 5-year-old black girl, her tiny hand wrapped tightly around a leash, guiding a scarred German shepherd with a long gash trailing down his right side. His name was King, and when that dog's eyes locked onto the defendant, he didn't bark, didn't charge forward. He simply growled, a low, guttural sound, like he had just recognized the face of the man who once cast darkness over his world. In that moment, everyone in the room understood some truths don't need words. Aaliyah Monroe hadn't spoken a single word since that day, since the failed kidnapping, since the trauma that pulled her voice deep inside, where no one could reach it but King, a retired K-9, who had saved children before he heard something no adult ever could. And when he growled a second time, everything began to change. This wasn't just a trial. This was the story of a little girl who lost her voice, and a companion who couldn't speak, but somehow understood every silent scream she'd ever held inside. You're listening to Tales of Black, where black stories are told with raw emotion, cinematic depth, and wounds that still haven't healed. If you've ever had to swallow your pain, if you believe some bonds go beyond words, then stay with us till the end. And if this story stirs something inside you, leave a comment, hit subscribe, because maybe, just maybe, your voice could be the light for someone still trapped in the dark. Chapter 1. The Day the Dog Growled in Court. The courtroom that morning was packed, every seat filled by reporters, lawyers, law students, and curious locals who'd never seen a trial bigger than petty theft. But today was different. Because the defendant, Raymond Hale, wasn't just accused of child abduction. He was the only known link to a chilling string of disappearances across the state of Georgia that had haunted families for 2 years. They called him the software engineer, with eyes cold as stone, no criminal record, no confession, no concrete evidence. And now, every shred of hope rested on a single witness, a 5-year-old girl, the only one who had seen the man up close. But there was a problem. Aaliyah Monroe hadn't said a single word since that day. Heads turned when the heavy wooden doors creaked open. The sound echoed like the courthouse itself, letting out a tired sigh, weary, somber, holding its breath. And then Aaliyah walked in. She wore a navy blue dress, clinging tightly to her mother's arm. But it wasn't the girl that froze the room. It was the dog beside her. A massive German shepherd, his dark gray coat traced with old wounds, a leash wrapped around the girl's hand. But clearly, he was leading her. His eyes didn't scan the room, didn't flinch at the noise. They locked straight ahead. Locked on Raymond Hale. His name was King, a retired police K-9, forced into early retirement after being stabbed while rescuing a missing child. People said he was smarter than most men, but today, they'd see something more. Today, they'd see that he remembered. Aaliyah took her seat on the witness stand. No one heard a word, No one saw a tear, but something was unmistakable. Her tiny hand trembled and made the faintest gesture. Only two beings in the room caught it, the judge and the dog. King stood still for half a second, as if an invisible command had reached his ears. Then his body tensed, ears perked, spine straight, eyes fixed on Raymond Hale. And then he growled. Not loud, not wild, just a low, deep rumble, a sound that seemed to rise from his soul. It was enough to send chills down the spine of anyone sitting nearby, enough to drop the room into complete silence. Raymond Hale, who had been sitting tall, playing the part of the falsely accused, flinched, just a small movement, but to the trained eye, it was a crack in the mask. Bang, the gavel slammed down. Judge Malcolm Green's voice cut through the tension. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. His voice no longer carried its usual calm. He didn't look at the lawyers, didn't glance at the prosecution. He looked straight at Aaliyah and at the dog beside her, standing like a silent soldier. Outside, the hallway felt colder than usual. Aaliyah sat on a wooden bench, her head resting against King's back. Her mother, Tanya Monroe, gently stroked her daughter's hair, though her own hands trembled. A few steps away, FBI agent Elijah Boone watched in silence, a strong black man with a face carved by years of truth and violence, eyes sharp as razors, always watching. He'd worked hundreds of cases, but few had ever made him hold his breath because of a dog. She didn't say a word. He muttered as he passed Judge Green. But the dog, he knows. I'd bet my badge on it. The judge gave the slightest nod. Then we need to find out what he knows. Back in the defense room, Raymond Hale was unraveling, no longer calm, no longer calculating. He slumped back in his chair, tapping frantically on the table. She didn't say anything, he whispered. What asked his lawyer, Marcus Lang, lifting his eyes. Hale shook his head. Nothing. It's just the dog. The dog is the problem. And in that moment, his eyes, once cold and composed, now showed fear, the kind only the guilty ever truly know. Back in the empty courtroom, King remained beside the witness stand, silent, still, waiting, and no one, not even those who had stared into the darkest corners of crime, could have imagined that this dog had just opened the door to a truth far more terrifying than anyone had dared to believe. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Stopped Speaking. Before that day, before darkness crept all the way to her front porch, Aaliyah Monroe was the kind of girl who didn't let the neighborhood stay quiet for long. 5 years old, springy curls tied into pigtails with purple ribbons. Aaliyah was the kind of child who questioned everything. Why doesn't the sky fall down if a cat dreams it's a dog? Does it wake up barking? Does God know grape is my favorite jelly bean flavor? Her voice was the soundtrack of the small house on Claymore Street, deep in southern Georgia. A simple, peaceful corner of the world, full of things people thought were untouchable. Until that one day. The day her mother, Tanya Monroe, couldn't even say out loud without her heart twisting inside her chest. It was a quiet spring afternoon. Sunlight danced across the backyard grass. Tanya stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of bean stew, eyes watching out the window where Aliyah was spinning in the yard, her pink dress fluttering like a cherry blossom caught in the wind. Then the phone rang. Just a quick call from Tanya's sister in Houston. 4 minutes. A simple hello, a short catch-up. 4 minutes. Enough to change everything forever. When she returned, the back gate was open. Tanya stepped outside, her feet quickening as her heart sank like a stone. Aliyah was still there, but she was no longer alone. Across the street, a black van sat idling. Its side door cracked open. A white man, maybe in his 40s, was kneeling in front of Aliyah. He was smiling, a soft, smooth smile. But there was something off about it, something deeply wrong. "I've got some puppies in the van," he said gently. "Tiny little ones. Just waiting for a sweet girl like you to come take care of them. Want to see." His voice melted like sugar in water. But Tanya, she felt the wind shift. A chill climbed her spine, deep and instant. Her instincts screamed, "This man is danger." "Aliyah!" she shouted. The man turned. The smile vanished. His eyes flashed. Not fear, but calculation. And then he grabbed her daughter's arm. Aliyah stood frozen. No scream, no tears, just wide eyes like all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Across the street, Martha Jackson, 72 years old, a retired Army nurse, was walking her poodle. She saw everything. "Hey, get your hands off that little girl right now!" Her voice cracked like a siren. The man paused, his grip loosened. It was all the opening Aliyah needed. She yanked her arm free and bolted into her mother's embrace. Tanya held her tight, feeling the frantic rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat hammering against her chest. The van screeched away, tires screaming black scars onto the asphalt. But from that moment forward, Aliyah was never the same. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Leading the investigation was Agent Elijah Boone, a seasoned black FBI agent who had worked over 30 child abduction cases in his 20-plus year career. "Did she say anything?" he asked. Tanya shook her head. "No, not a word. She just held me and shook." Next to her mother, Aliyah sat motionless, not crying, not blinking, not even looking at anyone. When Agent Nyla Graves, a gentle-voiced woman from the FBI, knelt beside her, "Do you remember what the man looked like?" Aliyah? Oh, no response. You can nod or shake your head. You don't have to speak. Still silence. Her eyes were open, but hollow, her lips pressed tight, frozen in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Selective mutism, Nyla whispered to Elijah. Trauma-induced silence. We see it a lot in kids after attempted kidnappings or abuse. Elijah nodded slowly, but disappointment clung to his face. No voice means no statement, and no statement means no conviction. That night, The house once filled with giggles and endless questions was drowned in silence. Only the ticking of the clock echoed in the halls. Aliyah sat on her bed, eyes locked on a shadowed corner of the room. Tanya sat beside her, holding a storybook her daughter once begged her to read every night. Now, her voice cracked through the pages because the little girl who used to interrupt every other sentence with jokes and questions was now as silent as fog. Downstairs, David Aliyah's father sat at the kitchen table, once the man who danced to the radio every evening. Now he sat motionless, head down, eyes red. "We have to try something different," Tanya said quietly. The doctor suggested a support dog. David raised an eyebrow, unsure if he heard her right. "You think a dog's gonna make her talk again?" "No," Tanya replied, her eyes gazing up the stairs. "I think a dog might be able to listen to what she can't say." 25 miles away, inside a quiet recovery center for retired service animals, a German shepherd lay motionless in the corner of a medical room, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His name was King, and fate taking the long way round was already moving to bring him to the girl who had lost her voice, but hadn't lost hope. Chapter 3. The Van by the Sidewalk. People often say, "The devil never shows up with horns and a tail. Sometimes he comes with a friendly smile and a bag of candy." Or in Aliyah's case, an offer to come see some puppies. 2 p.m. That was the exact moment everything shifted. Just minutes before, Aliyah had been spinning through the backyard, her tiny feet trampling the golden blossoms that had bloomed along a path only she had carved day by day, all spring long. Her pale pink dress danced in the breeze, curls bouncing with every joyful step. Her mother, Tanya, stood in the kitchen, leaning against the sink, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. She smiled, that soft, quiet kind of smile only mothers know, the kind that tucks a memory into an invisible album, kept only in the heart. The phone rang. Her sister, Houston. Tanya stepped into the living room. She turned her back for just 4 minutes. When she came back, the gate was wide open, and Aliyah was no longer alone. Her heart kicked into overdrive. Her legs moved faster than her thoughts. What she saw out there felt like a dream she couldn't believe was real. A man, white, around 40, tall, wearing glasses, was crouching by the curb. A black van sat parked at the sidewalk, engine humming, side door half open like it had no intention of staying. "I've got the cutest little puppies inside," he said sweetly. "They're looking for a friend. A sweet girl like you want to come see." Aliyah stood less than an arm's length away, her head tilted. Big eyes stared at the van. Was it curiosity or fear? Tanya didn't think. She didn't weigh her options. She screamed a sound that sliced through the air like a blade. "Aliyah!" The man's head snapped around. His smile cracked, revealing something colder underneath. Gone was the warmth. Gone was the friendly stranger. All that remained was the predator. In one sharp motion, he grabbed Aliyah's arm. Her eyes went wide. Her body froze like a deer caught in headlights. No scream, no struggle, just stillness. Absolute, terrifying stillness. But fate was already watching. Across the street stood a 72-year-old woman with a leash in her hand. Martha Jackson, retired nurse, living alone with her poodle. Oscar. She didn't hesitate. "Hey, you sick bastard, let go of that child." Her voice rang out like a rescue siren. The man flinched, his grip loosened. And Aliyah ran not toward the house, but toward her mother like something primal had taken over. Tanya scooped her daughter into her arms, held her so tight. She could feel the quake of Aliyah's tiny heartbeat thumping like a war drum. The van revved. Tires screeched. It peeled away, vanishing in a swirl of red dust on Claymore Street. But it didn't vanish from memory. 10 minutes later, Agent Elijah Boone and his team arrived on scene. The street was nearly clean, no cameras, no clear evidence. Only one shaky description. Male, white, slim. A black van, no license plate visible, but I saw the first 3 letters. Martha said firmly, YKZ. I was a nurse for 40 years. I don't forget things like that. Elijah nodded, jotting notes. He knew this type: predators who hunted children, often loners, rarely with priors, good at vanishing, even better at choosing victims. They lure kids with puppies, candy, promises that feel warm, he said, but what they don't count on is the instincts of children and the fury of a mother. That entire day, Aliyah said nothing, didn't draw, didn't make a sound. That night, she dreamed. A cold, shapeless nightmare, her tiny frame curled under the covers, arms wrapped tight around her worn-out, stuffed bunny, her mouth opened, but no sound came, only short, gasping breaths. Panic, fear. Tanya shot out of bed. She wrapped her arms around her daughter as if to hold together the pieces of a heart that was already breaking. The next morning, Elijah came back. In his hand was an old, worn case file full of photographs, each one a little girl, all under 10, all went missing near their homes, and every single one had mentioned being invited to see puppies before they vanished. "We have our suspicions," he said quietly, his voice low, like storm clouds gathering, "but we've never had a live witness until now." Tanya shook her head. "She can't be a witness. She can't talk. She won't draw. She won't react." Elijah paused, then said something Tanya didn't expect. "Maybe. She can't speak to us, but what if she can speak to someone else?" In another part of town, King the scarred German shepherd lay quietly by the window of the recovery center. Light spilled across his worn fur, his eyes watching the sky, eyes that had seen things no creature should ever have to see. And very soon, those same eyes would catch the scent of something familiar. A scent from that van by the sidewalk. and from the man who made a 5-year-old girl's heart forget how to beat without fear. Chapter 4. The Dog Who Knew. No one really knows how long a dog can remember. Some say dogs only retain things for a few minutes. But if you've ever looked into the eyes of a canine who's been to war, you'll understand there are things they never forget. At the St. Augustine Animal Recovery Center, in a quiet room tucked into the southwest corner, where sunlight filtered in through a single frosted window, King lay still as stone. His coat was ash dark, his body worn from time. Every winter, his joints ached, but his eyes were still as sharp as the day he first trained at the academy. He no longer stormed drug houses, no longer chased criminals through alleyways, no longer heard commands through radios and static. But one thing remained untouched: his instinct. And that instinct, the same one that had saved lives, was waiting now. Waiting to save a little girl who couldn't speak. 3 years ago, King was still one of the most elite dogs in Fulton County's K-9 unit. He'd once pulled a bleeding officer to safety. He'd sniffed out a bomb hidden beneath a church pew. He'd led a raid that rescued a missing girl, Sierra James, after 9 long days in captivity. Sierra had vanished on her way home from school. No leads, no suspects, nothing. Until King found a speck of dried blood by a dumpster in the back of an abandoned housing block. From there, he led the SWAT team step by step into a rotting house near the woods. When they kicked down the door, the man inside pulled a knife. No one had time to react, except King. He launched forward like a bullet wrapped in fur, slammed into the man before the blade reached flesh. That knife tore through King's right side, cutting so deep it kissed bone. But King didn't let go. He held the attacker down until the cuffs clicked. Sierra was saved, but King would never run the same again. The department declared him medically retired, unfit for duty. They placed him on the list, the one no dog should ever be on, the one for those scheduled for eternal sleep, just like hundreds of 4-legged warriors before him who fought for humans and were forgotten by them. But someone didn't forget. Dr. Simone Brooks, a veterinarian and trauma animal specialist, heard about King from a retired officer. She visited him the day before his scheduled euthanasia. King didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. But when she knelt down, placed her hand on his scarred side, and whispered, "You're not done yet." He closed his eyes, and that's how King's second life began. Simone didn't adopt him as a pet. She retrained him not to fight crime, but to listen to pain that had no voice. Her program, Therapy K-9 for Trauma Kids, was the only one of its kind in Georgia. It took retired police dogs and transformed them into emotional lifelines for children with deep wounds. Every child spoke a different language. Some cried in their sleep. Some refused to touch another soul. Some only painted in black. King didn't speak, but he sat beside them. He lay by their beds. He rested his head on their feet. And slowly the silence began to break. When Tanya Monroe called the center, her voice sounded like she was holding on to her final thread. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't react. The doctor said, maybe we could try a therapy dog. Simone didn't ask for more. Bring her! Let King try to talk to her his way. That day, when Aliyah saw King for the first time, she didn't run to him. She didn't reach out. She just stared into those deep brown eyes, as if the entire world was waiting on the response of a friend she hadn't met, but had somehow always known. King didn't move, didn't crowd her, didn't pressure. Simone said gently, if you feel safe, you can reach out your hand. King will understand that as permission. Silence, and then a small hand lifted, shaking, slow but sure. A hand that had once been yanked by a predator was now reaching out for something she believed might save her. King stepped forward one step, then another, until his warm breath kissed the palm of her hand. Aliyah didn't speak, but she placed her hand on his head, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Simone couldn't say a word. Tanya began to cry. And King, he didn't bark, didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes as if to say, I've found my new mission. This child needs me, and the truth is finally ready to rise. Chapter 5. A Child's Last Hope. Some wounds don't bleed. They don't need bandages. They don't show up on X-rays or hospital charts. But they can steal the voice of a child. And out of all the ways a heart can begin to heal, the Monroe family had only one thing left to believe in a dog. On that first day, after the fated meeting, Aliyah sat beside King for over an hour. She didn't speak, didn't touch him again, didn't look at anyone. But she stayed. For a child carrying trauma, staying is a beginning. Dr. Simone Brooks, the founder of the center, understood this more than anyone. She didn't ask questions, didn't push. She just placed a soft blanket nearby and said, if you want to sit near King, you can. He likes having company. But if you don't, he'll still be here. King remained still, head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, keeping silent watch. On day 3, Aliyah began bringing paper and crayons. She didn't draw people, didn't draw flowers. She drew a dog. Each drawing showed something different, a scar on the side, a leash, a dark shadow lurking behind the dog and the girl. In every picture, the girl had no mouth. Simone didn't ask. She just sat beside her and nodded. Your drawing, it's powerful. Tanya watched her daughter and didn't know whether to feel joy or sorrow. The child who once filled every hour with endless chatter now only spoke through heavy lines and silent sketches. But one thing was clear, she trusted King. On day 6, when the first thunder of summer rolled through the sky, Aliyah startled. She curled into the corner of the room, hands clamped over her ears, eyes wide with panic. King, without being told, without a single command, rose, walked over, and lay down beside her. She was trembling. King didn't bark, didn't move. He simply rested his head against her, his large back shielding her like living armor. And then Aliyah hugged him, No crying, no screaming, just a quiet, desperate hold, so tight. Tanya feared her daughter's heart might explode from all it had carried in silence. On day 10, Simone had King perform a few simple commands in front of Aliyah. Lie down, spin, shake. King obeyed each one with calm, flawless ease like a seasoned performer. And then something no one expected happened. When King completed his final roll and lifted his head, Aliyah pressed her lips together and whispered, "Good boy." A sound softer than a sigh, quieter than breath. But Simone heard it. Tanya heard it. The room fell completely still. "What did you say?" Baby Tanya gasped, tears already rising. Aliyah looked at her mother, then back at King. She didn't say another word. She just nodded. For the first time in weeks, her eyes had light in them again. That night, Aliyah drew one more picture. This time, she and King stood together in front of a large building. Above them, a scale of justice, and in the sky, she drew a small mouth, gently open. Simone handed the drawing to Tanya. She's ready, not to tell, but to show. And sometimes, that's enough. In the shadows of fear, when grown-ups couldn't find the words, a child and a dog found each other. Not with speech, but with something deeper, trust. Chapter 6. Whispers Beneath the Fur. Not every story needs words to be told. Some are whispered through a glance, a nod, a trembling hand resting on the back of a scarred dog. And sometimes, that's enough. Since that first whisper, good boy Aliyah hadn't spoken another word, but that didn't matter anymore, because the people around her knew she was communicating. And the strangest part King understood. On the second morning of the following week, Aliyah arrived at the center with a small cardboard box. Inside were folded pieces of paper, each one holding a word or a crayon drawing. Simone didn't ask. She just watched. Aliyah sat cross-legged on the mat, placed the box in front of King, and began to unfold the messages one by one. The first one read scared. King didn't bark, didn't move, but when Aliyah held the paper closer, he tilted his head and let out a soft, low growl, barely a sound, almost a whisper. Aliyah smiled, not wide, but a flicker of light returned to her face after weeks of shadow. That afternoon, Simone introduced a new exercise. Aliyah, if you don't want to speak, you can use signals instead, like this. Right hand points left. I don't like it. Left hand to your chest. I'm afraid. And so on. King will help us understand. Okay. Aliyah didn't respond with words, but when King lay beside her, she nodded just once. They started simple. What's your favorite color? What are you most afraid of? Did the man have a beard? Do you remember his van? Aliyah answered with gestures, no words, no sounds. Each time she made a sign, King responded, a head tilt, a quiet whimper, a subtle growl. Simone began recording each exchange, as if decoding a secret language one crafted between a child and a dog. That night, at home, Tanya saw her daughter standing in front of the mirror. She wore a t-shirt with King's face on it, stood still, chin lifted like she was rehearsing King's gaze. Then, without a word, Aaliyah turned to her mother and made a familiar hand sign, one she often used when King calmed her down. Tanya froze. "Are you talking to me, baby?" she whispered. Aaliyah didn't answer, but when King came over and sat beside her, she repeated the signal. And King growled, soft, steady. Tanya's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't instinct. This was language, a system born not of vocabulary but of trust, repetition, and shared pain between two beings carrying unseen scars. 3 days later, Aaliyah drew a picture for Agent Elijah Boone. In it, King sat beside a man in gray, a bearded man, wearing glasses, standing next to a black van. Above his head, a gray cloud. Simone looked at the drawing. "What is she saying here?" Aaliyah made a sign. King growled deep this time. Elijah stared at the paper. His jaw tightened. His eyes turned sharp. This child doesn't need words. The dog doesn't need a voice. But together, they just gave the strongest testimony I've ever seen. That evening, Aaliyah sat on the living room floor. King rested his head on her lap. Tanya whispered, "Do you remember him?" Aaliyah nodded, didn't blink. "If you saw him again, could you tell me?" Still silence. Then she made a new sign, one only she and King had practiced. King shot up, body rigid, ears forward. And this time he growled for real. Not a threat, not a bark. It was recognition, a memory, a scent, a picture buried in Aaliyah's mind, passed through something only King could feel. Tanya clenched her fists. Simone stood still. And Elijah, the man who never trusted emotional evidence, turned slowly and said, "That's it. We bring her to court and let King do the rest." Chapter 7. Back in the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors creaked open once more. The scent of old timber mixed with the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, casting a pale light on every face in a room falling silent. Not everyone knew the girl's name, but by now, everyone had heard about the dog. Aaliyah Monroe, 5 years old, braids tied neatly, lavender dress brushing her knees. She held a leash in her hand, not like a child taking her pet for a walk, but like a warrior leading the only ally who spoke her language. Beside her, King tall, steady, every step deliberate, his gaze sharp, as if he could smell the memory of guilt soaked into the floorboards. Judge Malcolm Green, a man who'd presided over cases of murder, abduction, and every horror in between, sat high above the room, but when Aaliyah walked in, he leaned forward just slightly, not because she was the only witness, but because he had once seen that dog growl, and it wasn't random. At the defense table, Raymond Hale, the man with the polite smile, pressed suit, and gold-rimmed glasses blinked slower than usual when he saw Aaliyah. But when his eyes met King's, a flicker, a tiny twitch in his jaw. Most people missed it, but Simone and Elijah saw it. The jury had been instructed to remain emotionally neutral, but it was hard not to feel something when a silent little girl approached the stand, accompanied by a dog who looked ready to tear through the world for her safety. Jenna Carter, lead prosecutor, rose from her seat. Her voice was soft, gentle as wind. "Hi, Aaliyah. I just want to say, you're very brave." Aaliyah didn't answer, just bowed her head slightly. Her hand stayed firmly on the leash. Jenna continued, "We won't ask you to speak today, but if you feel ready to show us something, you can use your signs. You can just look. King is here, and no one will hurt you again." The room held its breath. Jenna asked, "Do you recognize the man who was in your yard that day?" Aaliyah lifted her head, and for the first time, her eyes didn't waver. She looked directly at Raymond Hale. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her left hand and pointed straight at him. A deep, guttural sound rolled through the room. King growled. Not a bark, not a lunge, just a sound that crawled through every spine in the courtroom. Raymond Hale flinched, his hand pulled back just slightly. Marcus Lang, the defense attorney, jumped to his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation, not evidence." Judge Green raised his hand but didn't strike the gavel. Not yet. He looked at King. Then, as if driven by something primal, he asked, "Ms. Carter, has this dog ever had contact with the defendant before?" Jenna turned to the investigation team. Elijah Boone shook his head. "No, Your Honor, never." The judge turned to Hale. "Mr. Hale, do you know this dog? Have you ever seen him before?" Raymond swallowed hard. His lips trembled. "No, I've never—" But then his eyes flicked toward King, and King growled again. This time the jury gasped. Chairs shuffled, pens dropped. Someone exhaled sharply, and Jenna, she stepped to the prosecution table, pulled out a folder. "Your Honor, forensics just delivered results from soil analysis found on the defendant's tires. They match a very specific soil type only found at an abandoned cabin north of Dalton." The room erupted. Judge Green banged his gavel, voice cutting through the chaos. "This court will recess for 24 hours to allow investigators to examine the location. This session is adjourned." The gavel slammed down like thunder announcing a coming storm. Aaliyah remained seated, her hand still holding King's leash. No words were spoken, but Elijah knew. That little girl had just said the most important thing of her life. Not with her voice, but with a truth passed through the body of a creature who had once stared into the darkness and decided it would not win. Chapter 8. The Cabin Where the Wind Held Its Breath. Some places don't need warning signs. No fences, no tape. You just stand in front of them, and even the wind forgets how to breathe. That cabin was one of those places. 7:15 a.m. The next morning, A convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the FBI field office in Atlanta, headed toward the wild hills north of Dalton County. In the lead vehicle, Agent Elijah Boone sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on a topographical map. Beside him, a young officer gripped the wheel, still getting used to the weight of silence that hangs when a mission is real. In the second car, King sat beside Aaliyah. No one forced her to come, but when Simone asked, Aaliyah nodded, softly, but with the strength of steel. No one questioned it. Because King wasn't just a dog, he was the compass, and Aaliyah the one holding the needle. 10:03 a.m. The convoy stopped at the edge of an unmarked trail. No pavement, no signs, just jagged gravel and trees thick enough to swallow daylight whole. Elijah stepped out first. King followed, ears high, nose twitching, body tight like a wire about to snap. Aaliyah held the leash, each step small, but not a single one trembled. After 15 minutes of hiking, they saw it a rotting cabin, tucked deep in a sunken clearing. Its roof leaned sideways, wood flaking, windows boarded. It didn't look abandoned by nature, but hidden by design. King stopped a few feet from the front door. His head dropped. He growled low and deep, his claws scraping at the dirt. A siren without sound. "This place is wrong," Elijah muttered. "Every hair on my neck just stood up." He signaled to the tactical team. "Positions." 2 agents moved in, broke the door open a crack, then a rush of dust thick as smoke. Inside, darkness. No lights, no voices, only a silence so dense it pressed on their chests. The room looked empty, a wooden table, some canned food, a torn mattress, walls stained, ceiling cracked. But King didn't budge. He turned, stepped to the corner where the floorboards seemed off. He growled again, scratched. He was digging. Elijah dropped to one knee, knocked. Hollow. The sound didn't match the rest. 2 officers brought tools, pried the floor up. Beneath a narrow staircase, leading down. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind returning, whistling through broken boards like a trapped voice. The basement was cold, damp, black as a sealed well. Their flashlights caught the edge of every step, wood worn smooth by years, or something worse. Elijah went first, King at his side. At the far corner between torn backpacks, broken dolls, and crumpled clothes, a small figure. They aimed the light. A girl, pale, sunken eyes, tangled hair, torn shirt. Alive, but only barely. "Emma Sullivan," Elijah whispered. Missing for 6 months. The whole country thought she was dead. This time King didn't growl. He let out a soft whine, laid down beside her. Emma blinked slow, heavy, then reached out. Her fingers touched his fur. "Help. Me." Elijah wrapped her in his arms, voice cracking. "We're here. Sweetheart, you're safe now. We're taking you home." Back upstairs, the team found more. A boot print that matched Hale's exact size. A hair sample confirmed to be Emma's. A rusted chain identical to ones from earlier abductions. Traces of red soil beneath the cabin, the exact same kind found on Raymond Hale's car. Back in the vehicle, Aaliyah didn't speak, but when King climbed onto the back seat, lay down, exhaled deep, Aaliyah rested her head against his side. No words, no statements, no recordings, just that image. And Elijah knew, we don't need any more evidence, because sometimes there are witnesses whose eyes speak louder than the law ever could. Chapter 9. The Final Trial. There was no shouting, no dramatic outbursts, no grand declarations. Just a strange kind of silence that settled over the courtroom, as if someone had turned the volume of the entire world down. To hear the silent growl of a dog, and the final answer of a little girl who had once lost her voice. Day 3 of the trial resumed. Outside, the courthouse swelled with people press, reporters, cameras stacked like sentries. But inside no one moved. On the defendant's bench, Raymond Hale was no longer the smug man in a tailored suit. His hair clung to his forehead with sweat. His tie was crooked. His fingers, once drumming the desk, were now clenched, gripping whatever crumbling lies he had left. Jenna Carter stood, her eyes no longer those of a prosecutor seeking justice, but of a mother who had heard the unspoken cries of every silenced child. Your Honor, she began softly, we began this case with only one witness, but no voice. Now we have 2 living children, and a truth that can no longer be denied. She turned. Emma Sullivan walked in, frail, thin, but with eyes that gleamed like a blade reforged in fire. The room went still. Emma took the witness stand. Her voice was raspy, but clear. He locked me up in that dark room and said even if I screamed, no one would hear me. She didn't cry. She just looked right at Raymond Hale. And for the first time, he looked away. Elijah Boone approached the stand. He presented the topographic maps, the soil analysis, the boot prints, the hair samples, the DNA, the chains. No objections, no interruptions. Everything aligned perfectly. And at the end of his testimony, Elijah said one line. She didn't have to scream. The dog growled for her. Then it was Aaliyah's turn. She didn't sit at the stand. She sat beside King just like every other day. Jenna asked gently, Aaliyah, do you still remember that man? Aaliyah nodded. Can you show us again? Aaliyah didn't look at the adults. She looked at King and gave a single, familiar hand signal. King stood up, body tense, eyes locked on Raymond Hale. And then he growled. Not as a warning, not in threat, but as if delivering a sentence from somewhere deeper than justice itself. Raymond flinched, his whole body seizing like he'd touched a live wire. His lawyer turned to him. Raymond. Hale shook his head, and then whispered, barely audible, He remembers me. Judge Malcolm Green sat motionless for several seconds. then spoke. "Mr. Hale, do you wish to change your plea?" Raymond raised his head, eyes red, mouth trembling. And then he collapsed onto the desk, screaming like a wounded animal. "I did it. I locked them up. I didn't want to, but the first one, she looked at me like she knew." The courtroom exploded. Jenna closed her eyes. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around King. Elijah touched his forehead, exhaling a breath that felt like it carried every weight from a lifetime of doing what's right. The judge raised his gavel and struck it hard. Raymond Hale is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Additional charges include kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and psychological harm to a minor. The trial was over, but something else had begun. Not just justice, not just relief. A reckoning. A recognition that this world for too long had stayed quiet. And finally, someone growled back. Chapter 10. When the child spoke again. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a dramatic finale. It wasn't the kind of ending you see in movies. Just a quiet morning. And a small voice, soft as breath, yet strong enough to stop the world. After the trial, nothing changed overnight. Raymond Hale was taken away in silence. The press exploded. The media lit up. But in a quiet corner of the recovery center, Aaliyah Monroe sat by the window, looking out at the garden. King lay beside her, his head resting on her leg, eyes closed, breathing slow as if they both knew. Their mission was done. Tanya sat just a few steps away. In her hands, Aaliyah's newest drawing. No more shadows, no more monsters, just a little girl standing in sunlight, hair dancing in the breeze, smiling. Beside her, a large dog watched peacefully. Simone approached, smiling softly. She used yellow. She whispered, for the first time in 2 months, no black, no red, the color of sunlight. Elijah Boone stopped by in the afternoon. He placed a small wooden badge into Aaliyah's hand. It was carved with one name, King, and beneath it, a single line. For the one who spoke when no one else could. Aaliyah held it, stared at it, said nothing, but her eyes glistened, not from fear this time. That night, Tanya read a bedtime story like she used to. Her voice trembled because it had been too long. And so, the little princess said thank you to the one who protected her through the long journey. Not with words, but with loyalty, with breath, with heart. Tanya glanced over. Aaliyah lay on her side, facing King, who slept at the foot of her bed. Tanya stood, kissed her daughter's forehead, and then a small, real voice broke the silence. "Mama!" Tanya froze. Aaliyah turned, her eyes wide, her lips trembled, but she continued. "I love you, and King too." Tanya broke, not like someone hearing a voice again, but like someone seeing a soul return home. She rushed forward, gathered Aaliyah into her arms, and held on like she'd never let go. King lifted his head, looked at them both, and gently rested his head in their arms. 3 days later, Aaliyah and King returned to the park. the same park from the day everything changed. This time, no one was watching from afar. There was no fear, just an afternoon painted in gold, children laughing, the air clear. Alia held a soft cloth ball and tossed it. King ran after it, the scar along his side shimmering in the sun. Simone, Elijah, and Tonya sat on a wooden bench nearby. "Do you think she'll ever be normal again?" Simone asked. Elijah shook his head, but smiled. "No, I think she'll be something even better than normal, someone who lives her story, not fears it." That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, Aaliyah and King sat side by side. The wind brushed through her hair. She leaned down, whispered something into King's ear. Simone didn't hear it, but Elijah did. She just said, "Thank you for not giving up." Simone turned. "How can you hear that?" Elijah shrugged, his eyes still on the two quiet silhouettes in the grass. "Because I used to be a child who didn't speak either, and I know when a child finally speaks again, it's not because the world got quieter, it's because they finally found someone who could hear their silence." Ending Tales of Black. Aliyah and King. Some stories don't need a climax to leave you breathless. All they need is a little girl the world once silenced and a dog who growled in place of the truth. Aliyah Monroe didn't scream, King didn't bark, but somehow they made an entire nation listen. And if you're still wondering whether silence can save someone, remember this: sometimes the most important things are whispered in the quiet. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a belief, or a pain that never had a name, leave a comment below. Because someone out there might need to know they're not alone. Hit subscribe to hear real stories of voices once buried, of truths long ignored, and of souls still waiting to be called by their true name. This is Tales of Black, where we tell what history forgets and honor the truths only the heart can hear. Tales of Black, where silence speaks and truth remembers.